Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 101 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. And we are towards the end of the last chapter, chapter 33 of the third canto. And I'm assuming that today we'll be able to finish the third canto. So let's see how it goes. But first of all, of course, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastutyade Jatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Right, okay, so here we go, devotees. Chapter Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 33. It's titled Activities of Kapila. And we are in the fourth section, titled Devahuti Follows the Instructions of Kapila. The section actually is from verse 13 to verse 29, but we are at verse 27, so we've almost finished this section. And then we'll go on to the final section, which is from verse 30 to verse 37. Maitreya concludes the discussion about Devahuti. So, okay, here we go, devotees. Let's have a look here, verse 27. Right. So, verse 27. Situated in eternal trance and freed from illusion, impelled by the modes of material nature, she forgot her material body, just as one forgets his different bodies in a dream. So there's a fairly extensive purport here. Let's just have a look here. 3 paragraphs. Prabhupada begins by saying that a great devotee, one great devotee said that if we have no remembrance of our body, then we're not bound to Maya. We're not bound to material existence. As long as we're conscious of bodily existence, we are living conditionally under the modes. So, interesting. When we forget bodily existence, our material life is over. So this forgetfulness is possible when we engage in devotional service. In conditional life, we engage our senses in service to family, country, society, and just whatever, different types of things. But when we forget all those and realize that we are servants of the Lord, and that's it, and that's how we have to live. So that is forgetfulness of material existence. In other words, it's positive forgetfulness. Normally forgetfulness is taken to be a negative type of thing, some type of incompetency. But we know, of course, that in Bhagavad Gita chapter 15, verse 15, Lord Krishna says, Sarvasya chaham riddhi sanivishto mata smriti jnanam apornam cha. Krishna says, I'm seated in the heart of everyone, And from me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So for a devotee, Krishna gives knowledge of himself and of how to approach him, how to practice, how to be a devotee. Then he gives remembrance of different things which we've heard about him, about Krishna. But then, as in this case here, he also gives forgetfulness of our material existence, and that is very good. So then the second paragraph, in the second paragraph, Srila Prabhupada says that this forgetfulness occurs when we do devotional service. That in that case, the devotee is no longer working with the body for sense gratification, with family, society, etc., simply working for the Lord. And that, Prabhupada says, that is perfect Krishna consciousness. Then the third paragraph, the devotee is always merged in transcendental happiness, not merged in the Lord like the impersonalists, but merged in transcendental happiness, and therefore has no experience of material distresses. So this happiness is called eternal bliss. And Prabhupada makes the point that constant remembrance of the Lord is called samadhi or trance. And if we are constantly in that state, then there's no possibility of being attacked or even touched by the three modes of material nature. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, as soon as one is freed from the contamination of the three material modes, he no longer has to take birth to transmigrate from one form to another in this material world. Verse 28, her body was being taken care of by the spiritual damsels created by her husband Kardama, and since she had no mental anxiety at that time, her body did not become thin. She appeared just like a fire surrounded by smoke. Srila Prabhupada states in the purport that because Devahuti was always merged in transcendental bliss, she thought of the Lord was always fixed in her mind. And as mentioned in the verse, she didn't become thin because she was being taken care of by these celestial maid servants created by her husband. Prabhupada makes a really interesting point. I mean, it's a very interesting point. Prabhupada says that it is said, according to the Ayurvedic medical science, that if one is free from anxieties, he generally becomes fat. Krishna. So Devahuti was fully situated in Krishna consciousness, so she had no anxieties, and so at least her body didn't become thin. Yeah. Prabhupada says it's customary in the renounced order that one should not take any service from a servant or a maid. But Devahuti was being served by the celestial maid servants. So this might appear to be against the principles of spiritual life. But Prabhupada explains that just as fire is beautiful, even when surrounded by smoke. She looked pure, although living seemingly luxuriously. Verse 29. Because she was always absorbed in the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, she was not aware that her hair was sometimes loosened or her garments were disarrayed. So there's a fairly short purport here. Prabhupada points out the word Daivaguptam, protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada says it is very significant that the idea being that once we surrender to the service of the Lord, He takes charge of our maintenance, so we don't have to be in anxiety about bodily maintenance. The Lord, after all, the Lord takes care of the maintenance of innumerable species. So one who fully engages in His service will not be unprotected by Him. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Devahuti was naturally unmindful of the protection of her body, which was being taken care of by the Supreme Person. So that's the end. It's the end of the section. And now we come to the last section of the chapter, which is from verse 30 to verse 37, which is, we've titled, Maitreya concludes the discussion about Devahuti. Now, you know, there are 8 verses here, so it's not really a short section like some of the others even that we've encountered in this chapter, which may be sometimes even 2, but sometimes 3 or 4. So when the sections get longer, we have the practice of reading through all the translations of the verses, just so everyone gets a handle on the flow of the discussion. And then we go through again with the reading the purports also. But now in this case, it just so happens that even though it's an 8-verse section, most of the verses are short. Most of them, actually. Most of these verses, I should say, don't have purports. Some of them do, I think 3 do, but the rest don't. So I am just going to read straight through. Right, so section 5, Maitreya concludes the discussion about Devahuti from verse 30 to verse 37. So verse 30, My dear Vidura, by following the principles instructed by Kapila, Devahuti soon became liberated from material bondage, and she achieved the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Supersoul without difficulty. So as it happens, there is a purport here. So let's have a look. So Prabhupada makes the point that 3 words are used here. 3 words have been used in this connection to describe the achievement of Devahuti. So they are Atmanam, Brahma Nirvanam, and Bhagavantam. So these refer to the gradual process of discovery of the absolute truth, mentioned here as Bhagavantam. So Anyway, the Supreme Lord is living in the Vaikuntha planets. Nirvana means to extinguish the pangs of material life. When one is able to enter into the spiritual world, or a deeper spiritual realization, then one becomes automatically freed from material pangs. Okay. So this automatically happens. And that is called Brahma Nirvana, which is the second of these two special features. So the Vedas say that Nirvana means cessation of the materialistic way of life. That's Nirvana. Whereas Atmanam means realization of the Supersoul in the heart. And ultimately the highest perfection is realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, Devahuti, it's to be understood that Devahuti entered the planet which is called Kapila Vaikuntha. Interesting. So there are innumerable Vaikunthas, all known by the name of the form of Vishnu who predominates the particular Vaikuntha planet. So each one has a different name. So he has innumerable expansions, and according to the positions of the symbols in his hands, those expansions are identified. So there's also a Vaikuntha planet known as Kapila Vaikuntha, to which Devahuti was promoted to meet Kapila and reside there eternally, enjoying the company of her transcendental son. You may remember yesterday we were reading in this same chapter, and the point was made that Devahuti was feeling great separation from her son, Kapila. Yeah, great separation. So now they're together again in Kapila Vaikuntha. And she's engaged. Prabhupada says she's enjoying the company of her transcendental son. Really what it means is she was engaged in his devotional service. All right, so now we go on to verse 31. The place where Devahuti achieved her perfection, my dear Vidura, is understood to be a most sacred spot. It is known all over the three worlds as Siddha Pada. Okay, verse 32. Dear Vidura, the material elements of her body have melted into water and are now a flowing river, which is the most sacred of all rivers. Anyone who bathes in that river also attains perfection, and therefore all persons who desire perfection go bathe there. So 31 has no purport, 32 has no purport. Here's verse 33. My dear Vidura, the great sage Kapila, the personality of Godhead, left his father's hermitage with the position of his mother and went towards the northeast. 34. While he was passing in the northern direction, all the celestial denizens, known as Charanas and Gandharvas, as well as the Munis and the damsels of the heavenly planets, prayed and offered him all respects. The ocean offered him oblations and a place of residence. Okay, let's have a look at the purport here. Just short purport. So Prabhupada makes the point that it's understood that Kapila first went towards the Himalayas, and then he followed the Ganges down, back down to, back down to the Ganges Delta at the sea, Ganga Sagara. So the ocean gave him residence at Ganga Sagara, where the river meets the sea. And now it's called Ganga Sagara Tirtha. It's a popular pilgrimage place now. People gather to offer respects to him. Srila Prabhupada goes on to talk about the imposter Kapila, who is, he's known for teaching something called Sankhya, but actually is different from the Sankhya of Lord Kapila in Srimad Bhagavata. Verse 35. Even now Kapila Muni is staying there in trance for the deliverance of the conditioned souls in the three worlds. And all the acharyas, or great teachers of the system of Sankhya philosophy, are worshipping him. Verse 36. My dear son, since you've inquired from me, I have answered. O sinless one, the descriptions of Kapila Dev and his mother and their activities are the purest of all pure discourses. Verse 37, which is the last verse in the chapter and the last verse in the third canto. The description of the dealings of Kapila Dev and his mother is very confidential, and anyone who hears or reads this narration becomes a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is carried by Garuda, and he thereafter enters into the abode of the Supreme Lord to engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So there's a very short purport here. Srila Prabhupada says, let me just read the whole thing actually. The narration of Kapila Dev and his mother Devahuti is so perfect and transcendental that even if one only hears or reads this description, he achieves the highest perfectional goal of life, for he engages in the transcendental loving service of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is no doubt that Devahuti, who had the Supreme Lord as her son, and who followed the instructions of Kapila Dev so nicely, so there's no doubt that Devahuti attained the highest perfection of human life. Hare Krishna. So there you go, devotees. That is the end of the third canto. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.